The book I wrote is Quaker Constitutionalism and the Political Thought of John Dickinson, published by Cambridge University Press. It's the first comprehensive analysis of the political thought of John Dickinson as it was rooted in Quaker constitutional theory. My interest in John Dickinson came out of my interest in early American political theory and religion. I started out studying Quakers and Quakerism in the colonial period, and when I got to the Revolution, his name kept coming up. And when I tried to research him, I couldn't find anything about him, or very little, and what was there was very conflicted, and nobody seemed to really be able to understand his actions. Very few people have heard of Dickinson today, and that's in stark contrast to his reputation during his lifetime. It's a little bit anachronistic to say he was a household name, but he came pretty close, as anybody did. In the years immediately leading up to the Revolution, his name was better known than Washington or Franklin. John Dickinson wrote many of America's first state papers and many of the highest level documents, policy documents, constitutions, legislation, but he also wrote many more things for ordinary American people and spoke to them in a way that very few other leaders did. And these include newspaper articles, poems, and America's first patriotic song. Dickinson first entered the national political scene during the Stamp Act controversy, and he was the nominal leader of the Stamp Act Congress and wrote the Stamp Act Resolves, the declaration of the Stamp Act Congress. And then he became famous when he wrote his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania against the Townshend Acts in 1768. And these letters made him America's first popular idol. He was known around the colonies and around the Atlantic world. The French loved him. The British considered him the spokesman for the American cause. He was really the leader up until about 1775, when the tone of the Revolution changed. Dickinson always advocated peaceful resistance, and in fact, he was the very first American to advocate a national program of civil disobedience, so breaking unjust laws peacefully and protesting those laws to get changed. And so he advocated this for the Stamp Act, and it was repealed not only because of his actions. And he advocated the same course of action, peaceful resistance to the Townshend Acts. And he believed that the best measures were constitutional, were peaceful, and that no persons or property should be damaged or destroyed. Well, when the tone of the resistance changed in about the summer of 1775, his moderate stance fell out of favor, and his popularity waned. But even though he became less popular, he was no less respected. And so just less than a month before the Declaration of Independence was issued, he was on the committee to write America's first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. And this was a remarkable document. The version he wrote was quite different from the one that was actually implemented in 1781. His 1776 version had several notable characteristics. One is that it established a strong central government for the new states, and it also had a religious liberty clause. And this clause was remarkable because it was the first clause, the first writing in an Anglo-American constitution that included gender-inclusive language. So Dickinson actually provided for the religious liberty of women. Dickinson's Quaker background played a significant role in all of his writings and all of his actions. Dickinson was not a Quaker, but he was raised among Quakers. He lived with Quakers. His whole immediate family was Quakers. Very strong Quaker women informed his political theory. And so when he advocated civil disobedience, he was advocating a Quaker form of resistance. When he wrote the Articles of Confederation with the Religious Liberty Clause, and he included women, that was a very Quakerly thing to do, because Quakers at the time were the only religious group who allowed their women to speak publicly and to preach. Quaker women traveled around the country and even the world preaching. And so Dickinson wrote this Religious Liberty Clause, and he started out by saying, no persons shall be molested in his or their practice of religion. But then he crossed out his or their and wrote his or her. And to signify that women should be able to practice their religion freely in Quaker terms meant that women should be able to speak publicly. And women were not considered to have a public voice at this time. So in this way, Dickinson was very much sort of an early feminist and wrote this language in a constitution. And of course, it wasn't adopted. None of the provisions of his Articles of Confederation were adopted. On July 1st, there was a vote on the Declaration. And Dickinson was the first one to speak, and he gave an eloquent speech reiterating all of the concerns he had about declaring independence. And his was a very reasonable argument. He recognized that we didn't have a government, we didn't have a constitution, we didn't have a strong army, we had no foreign support, we had no factories to make munitions, we had no common currency. We were in a very weak position. So there were these practical reasons why he thought independence was a bad idea. America was very safe under the protection of the British Constitution, and he wanted to retain that. But there were also bigger philosophical questions, and he believed, as other Quakers did, that a constitution was sacred. That didn't mean untouchable, it didn't mean unchangeable, but it meant that you should try to preserve the laws that are good and that are there and that protect people. And Britain had a very long history of protecting rights. His career was quite illustrious. After that, he served again in the Continental Congress in '79. And then in 1781, he was elected president of Delaware, and he served for a year and then was elected president of Pennsylvania, and he held those two posts for a time simultaneously. He was the president of the Annapolis Convention that met to consider amending the Articles of Confederation. And it was his letter that went to Congress that recommended a constitutional convention in 1787. And he played a very significant role in that body. He provided the foundation for the most important compromise on representation. He suggested that one branch of the government, of the legislature, represent the people and the other branch represent the states. That was the groundwork for what later was called the Connecticut Compromise. He sacrificed his own reputation for the good of the country, and a refrain that he made throughout his life was that he would rather offend his countrymen by speaking the truth than see them injured by not choosing the right path.